Hey friends and music makers, a very warm welcome back to the channel. Ever wondered what separates a good bass line from a great one? Well, in today's live stream, we're going to be turning up the heat on that topic. Good versus great bass lines. We'll break down some common mistakes that cause a muddy low end, some different bass pattern styles for house and techno, and many of the subgenres in and around those two. Proven techniques to level up your basses, and we'll explore what makes a great bass line and how getting this right can give you a fat, dynamic, and amazing low end that will get people moving. Happy days. So join me as we work through these steps, essential steps to take your bass from good to great. If you've got any questions, as always, drop them in the comments and let's learn and grow together. Don't forget as well, if you're enjoying the content on the channel, to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out on future streams. My mission is to help you to level up your production skills and unlock your creative potential. So without further ado, let's dive in and take a look at what's on the menu today. Who doesn't like a good bass line, by the way? Feel free to drop some comments in the chat. But yeah, as I said, bass lines, I think I haven't met somebody yet in my life that doesn't like a good bass line in electronic music, and not only electronic music. So let's just do a quick test that everything's working fine. Hopefully my microphone is already good. As I said, always checked pre-stream, but funny things can happen. And let's just play a couple of things here, and then I'll break down what I've got going on in this view, so you understand kind of what we're doing today. So let's just have a bit of audio. And if anyone is already with me in the stream, they could just let me know that the mic is coming through clean and clear, and also we have music. That would be amazing. I would appreciate that a lot. All right, so it's just a tester there. What have we got here? Mainly, as always, we like to do things from scratch on this channel. We've literally just got a few pieces here so that I don't spend too much time doing something that I've kind of done ahead of time. So literally, if we go left to right, I've just got a simple drum rack here. Let's just slide that over there. I've got a simple drum rack here that I've put a selection of kicks inside, spread out across a empty drum rack originally, and as I said, I've dropped a bunch of kick samples in there so we can move our notes that are playing the kicks up and down through some different kick types. We'll go through that in a moment. Then we've got a few other tracks here which are just literally some different drum grooves. So if we play these, got sort of like a progressive house drum groove here, stripped and full. And similarly to the left, we've got some house drums. And once again, full and stripped. And then to the left, we've got some techno drums. Again, stripped. And then full. That's just going to give us some stuff for context. And then over here on the right is all reminders for me to try and work my way through things to show you. I've also built a little rack over here, and this rack essentially contains different basses. They're all Ableton patches and presets, so if you hear anything you like, you can always ask me which bass was that, and I can show you. They're all from Ableton Live, so they're all Ableton Live presets. So as long as you've got Ableton Live and you've got the packs and the suite version, you should, in theory, be able to access all of these. They're not my own bass patches. They're all bass patches that come from Ableton's browser and library. And I've just put them in a rack together so I can easily, again, morph between all the different basses, and we can try out some different sounds and see how the different bass patches work with different patterns, etc. So today's going to be a bit of a teaching type of session, not so much on a new music idea or going too far there. It's about helping you guys and girls learn about bass and things to look out for and good patterns to make, and key things, as I said, that will turn a good bass into a great bass. And I think everybody, in theory, as I said, can benefit from that. So let's start with a fairly common situation that, let's say, different types of basses. One that people use an awful lot, and that's what's called a root note bass. So let's say that we're working with a track or a piece of music, a music idea, and we have some chords, a chord progression of some sorts, and literally what we're thinking to do is take our chord progression and take all of these lower notes of the chords and turn those into a bass line. Now that's a very, very common technique, but there's a few things to, of course, spice that up and learn about and look into. So we're going to start with root note basses. And we're also going to, for a second as well, just think about like kick drums. And the reason for having the kick rack and just some plain kicks over here is before you even start with the bass and the bass sounds, a good kick is going to make a massive difference. So let's say that today the most important conversation in the music idea or what we're testing out here is going to be between your kick drum and your bass, and anything else that also lives down in that low frequency, in that band of frequency. So if we're looking at just some MIDI for a second and we open up a piano roll and we've got some notes here, we're right down here in the piano, right? We're right down in 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, these kind of octaves down here. And typically when you're starting out a music idea or a track, you're going to be thinking, or you should be thinking a little bit about, you know, the kick and the bass, and they're going to be living down in this space. Sometimes the kick lower than the bass, sometimes the bass is lower than the kick, but we need to consider that a bit and give it a little bit of thought. I'm unlikely in any track I ever do to have a kick that sits outside of octave 0 to 1. That's higher than that. That would be very unlikely for me unless I'm making a top kick or some special kick that's very, just a click or something at a point in my track. But generally my proper kicks are going to live down in here. Now basses could also, as I said, live down in the same octave, but they also could be higher up as well. And you can even layer basses where we actually cover 3 octaves that makes up one bass sound. So kicks are important, and your kick selection, it's a very cliched thing to say, you know, pick the right kick drums or pick the right samples in your tracks. But if we just push play over here and we go through some of the kicks, right at the top here, I've got a very short, punchy sort of kick. Let's go right down the bottom fast. We'll go all the way down the bottom. And we've got these kind of big, boomy, subby kicks. Let's go through a few of those. So these ones sort of from here downwards, if I mute the 3 kicks that come after the first, let's have a think about when does this kick, when does the envelope, like the note stops here, but when do we think it's silent? Like how far into this bar does it go? Maybe to there somewhere, right? So it'll already be going over the top of the front of that kick, the second kick that's coming, right? Let's try some of the other ones. Similar. The tail of that kick is here somewhere. Now it's not dying out to silence, and if we sort of pull this down a bit, you'll see, you can sort of see over here on the meter, actually it doesn't go to silence even for the end of the bar. It's re-triggering before it's even faded to complete silence. So we know that's going to overlap that second kick, and we know that if we've got a bass line involved in this equation, then the space between the kicks where we might be putting our bass, this kick drum is going to be all over the top of that, right? They're going to be colliding 100% for sure. Let's try out a couple more here with the big boomy kicks. So all of those have big boomy long envelopes, so we can adjust those things. So we could have a big subby kick like this, and we can go in and shape the kick a bit so that it actually goes to silence before the next kick happens. But I just want to point out that if you choose any of those kicks there, they are going to, you know, work with the bass differently to some of the other kicks we've got here. So let's take that kick pattern again. We'll go back to where I sort of started, right up the top. So in the middle, there are some nice punchy ones. These ones are short, right? And it's kind of dying away quicker. Let's go down through a few of these. So they leave a lot more space. But again, we can still shape them, but they're short, punchy kicks. So if you choose that, you're going to give yourself a different conversation between that kick, those short, punchy kicks like that are very tight, and the bass line. And if we were sort of to go, this is the kick agile shot. If we pop into the rack and we find that kick, so let's just push play so we can see it pop up on the pads. So where is it? It's over here, this one here. And if we bring it into the view here, you can kind of see the envelope of it, the transient. It's quite a short kick versus if we come right down to some of the punchier ones or longer ones we listened to earlier, you can see they're much longer, right? So decay and release and getting to understand ADSR, the envelopes of these kick drums, also is useful, right? But essentially the bass and the kick are going to have a conversation. If you pick subby kick drums, then perhaps you're going to be thinking about having a bass that's short and tight and big boomy kicks, or maybe you're picking a short tight kick drum and that's giving you more room to have more of a boomy bass. So I just wanted to point that out, that this thinking starts with the kick even before you sort of start playing around with bass lines, right? So that's why I've got a kick rack here. You'll hear in a moment when we test out some of these kicks how well they fit with the bass and how well they don't. All right, so let's say we go, we'll just drag down a few things here a little bit on our bass rack. Some of these things we're going to look at in a little bit. And let's say we go over to this chord progression we've got, which looks like this. This is the original chord, and it sounds like this. Okay, I'm going to just bring in my 4 on the floor pattern. So let's do that. So if I'm to copy that across and use that as a template for a bass line, I've also sort of drawn in a clip below, and literally that's the same chords, but I've just stopped them being chopped up, right? So here they're chopped up into 1/8 notes, so they trigger a little bit and we've got a little bit of rhythm to them. But let's say also we could be working with them fully sustained like so. Okay, so let's say that we copy over the sustained and the other pattern. So we'll bring them both over into the bass track, like so. And what we're going to do is a classic move. So we've sort of come up with the chords first. We're thinking about writing a bass. We take out all of the top notes. Like so, and we've got ourselves just the root notes of the chords. We then would highlight the clip, and then we're going to bring it down a couple of octaves, down into sort of somewhere around here, maybe not as low as that. We'll try it here first. So let's put that one on, and we'll turn off this track for now, so we don't need to hear that. So that's why we've got it very raw, very rough here. We've done nothing other than we've just said copy over the chords, put them down on the roots, and happy days, we've got a bass line. Let's just try out a few of these kicks and hear which ones kind of punch through just by themselves without us doing anything. So at the moment we've got some of the more shorter kicks. I've got one of those in play. Let's go through those. So that one works well because we get the top click of the kick. Nice, cuts through. Some not so well. That one's quite good. That one's really good. So the one at the very top, it's got a nice click, and I think that and this one maybe. That one. So there's a couple there, just automatically without doing anything. Those kicks work with that root note bass better than, let's say, if we now bring that kick all the way down to some of these big boomy subby ones. That doesn't sound too good to my ear. It's okay. Not so good. And then here we have some punchy kicks in between big and subby and really short. And a lot of those are nice because they again have a really nice click and top. So that's just a very quick thing just to point out that the kick drum you choose that's having the conversation with the bass, you can already do a lot of work there just purely with the sample and sound, and find one that's going to kind of fit well without any EQs and side chains and any stuff going on just yet. All right, so what's one thing about root note basses that works, and something that's, well, let's say not all that particularly interesting about what we've got here at the moment? And if we do the sustain one, let's try that as well. Bring it down, so we need to sort this one out the same way as the others. So we're going to mute all the top notes. And root note basses following chords been going on since, I don't know, probably since music and a bass accompanied music that long ago. Now let's try out some different basses here as well. I think the second bass down here is interesting. This one. Let's bring our volume up a bit. So we can hear we've got a good kick. We haven't really done a lot, but we've got something, a root note bass, one with the chop, which gives us a nice little bit of rhythm to it. But what I want to talk about is when you do something like this, so let's make our clip here a really bright color, something like perhaps the pink here, and let's open up the original chord MIDI and let's layer that in with that. So we can see it down the bottom here, right? And what we want to do is just tidy that up a little bit so we don't get too many clips in the way. Let's bring these out the way so we don't see those. We'll do that again, so we layer those two over each other, right? And so we've got that. And also, if we wanted, we could actually have the kick in this equation as well, right? So at the moment, the confusing thing is, when you do something like this, is that the kick drum is actually higher because the notes are in C3, they're actually up, which will sort of look a bit confusing because they're up there, but the pitch is not up there. Pattern stays the same, but the tuning of the kick is much, much lower. We could move the notes down, but by putting our kick notes on C3, we're relying on the tuning of whatever that kick originally the sample is recorded in, which we can check in a moment. That's also something we should pay attention to. So we're getting going here. Okay, this is a bit of a slow and steady start, but don't worry, things are going to get more interesting as we go. But first of all, we want to understand how we can make a root note bass a little bit more interesting. So when we do this layering up of these two, right, and we've got that, essentially we have a lot of frequency. So we've got harmony, we've got a bass following the chords, and we've got a bit of separation from them. Sometimes a pro tip can be going into the chord track, and if you want a bit more separation, you can take out all the same bottom notes that you've actually, you know, added to make the bass from. You take them out of the bottom of the chord. So here now, the chords themselves are just triads. They're no longer a 4-note chord. Let's just put one comparison so we can do an A-B. So I think it benefits my ear. That tells me that's a good move. I can hear the space that's given me between the chords and the bass. If I'm really stubborn and I want the 4-note chords and the bass, it works. It's just a bit more condensed. So that's up to you. You know, if that was your, you know, mission to make it a 4-note chord, again, we can use side chains and EQs and lots of things to kind of get a bit more separation. That's not really what today's all about. I mean, it's making good basses great, but there is absolutely good thinking behind this, and that can pay off, as I said, for more space. So what I want to speak about is something that's called the 80-20 rule. Now, we don't have a lot of rules in music, and of course it's not a rule that you have to stick by and that's it. There's no other options. It's just something to keep in mind. So if you're doing a root note bass like we're doing here, an 80-20 speaks about 80% root notes and 20% non-roots. So the point I was kind of making a moment ago before I removed those notes is we've got a lot of frequency here, essentially, because we're following the pattern exactly in the bass as the chords. And if we had a melody doing the same thing, we're just basically spreading ourselves out across the piano, but we're playing the same frequency. And you know, these notes in the end are actually overlapping these notes in frequency as well. That's getting pretty technical, but the harmonics of the bass here will end up digging in to where the chords are as well. So we've got a lot of frequency. So the 80-20 rule is thinking about how can we make this pattern a little bit so it's not just only roots. Right, so let's say we don't really need the sustained one as well. Let's say we work with the one that's kind of like we've got here. So let's copy it down. And in this one, what we're going to try and do here is make it not just stay on the root. So we can see the chords and we're in C major, let's say. Let's check that. Let's turn on our scale tool and see, are we in C major? Yes, we can be working in C major. All our notes are in that chord. By the way, if you're here with me in the stream and you've got any questions, do feel free to drop them in the chat and let me know anything you want to discuss regarding basses. So 80-20. So let's say we take 20% 80. I'm not going to get too mathematically go into the maths here, but let's say I'll try and do something a little bit perhaps at this part of the chord progression and use some other notes in the scale. So what I might do is put this particular F here together into one. Let's use Command J to consolidate it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try maybe the progression. What are we using here? The D. So perhaps we could have a bit of E here. Let's try this. And we want this clip, so I'm just going to color that a bit different. Okay, so that worked. Going back up to the E, and let's see, maybe we can do another little rhythm here, and we can move between these. So we're staying in scale, but we're now not just following the F, which was the bottom note of the chord along here. We're now getting 20 out of the roots. Just realized I was out of scale and I went to change it, but I clicked the wrong button. So we could go even down. So might try coming back up here. Yeah, so is that the C or the B I've gone down to there? Just checking. So it's the A actually. So that progression already kind of works a little bit. We can also change a little bit the timing here. So where these are changing, it's already interesting because this particular chord progression, it doesn't change on the bar. So, you know, these are the bar sections and it's kind of changing chords before, often on the eighth note, couple of eighth notes earlier than the bar. So we can also play around with that here. So perhaps we could have, you know, some sort of little bit of a rhythm change here as well as the note change. And we can also chop these up into eighth notes in a moment. Yeah, so that could actually come in on the bar perhaps, and we have a little rest at the end. Okay, we'll take that all the way across. So I'm going to leave the timing as it is. Let me change my grid in the background, and then I'm just going to slice each of those notes so they follow the eighth. Now again, we could change that rhythm, some of those sustained, but that would go back to sort of original pattern. But now we're out of the root notes of the chord, and if we were to lay the two over each other, and let's ping pong between what we had in the basses, that is. So let's say we've got the new bass, let's play the old bass. And then the new 80-20. Let's just make sure they trigger at the same time. So there's a concept for you, you know, rather than just doing the root notes and having a lot of frequency, look for other notes in the scale that are 20% non-root. So I've got three of that final chord that originally played all F, which is the note there. It was all sitting on the F across here. That was the root note of the chord there. And instead of that, we've got this whole new pattern here that takes it out of the root of the chord and gives us some different frequencies and new harmonies there, right? And you could sort of do, you know, a bit more of that, but it's about this sort of kind of thing that if you stick to basses that stay, you know, 100% root notes. They're a lot of frequency and they don't have a lot of interest in them. But if you think about 80-20 with the root, as I said, getting out off of the root and giving yourself a little bit of variation, you can make a difference here. I would probably keep both clips. That is the original root note bass with just the roots, and then my 80-20, and then I could actually jump between those during the track. So if we sort of put these in again with a bit of other drums or something like that, let's maybe say we just check it out with the progressive drums. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about, root note basses, how to get them a little bit more, add a little, it's like cooking and you chop up a chili and add that to your dish. Well, you know, thinking about getting off of the roots a bit, not 100% roots, a little bit of variation could be a very nice idea. So that for me works quite well. We could also try out some of the other bass sounds in here just so we can familiarize those, but I think the one that I chose is a good bass sound for this particular more sustained bass line. And if we were to copy this down and take out the chops, so that is that we just make all of these root notes singular notes, that will also sound quite different. And I think if I was doing that, I would then start to think about side chains and a slower attack on the synth that plays these notes, so that again they're fitting together quite nicely. Just pop those notes together like so. Let's change our bass a bit. So if you're writing cinematic, melodic techno, melodic house, genres where you make these long sustained basses that follow your chords, everything I've shown you here could elevate that. It could turn a good bass, simple bass, to something a little bit more interesting. Trying out some of the other basses so you can hear what they sound like with that pattern. Way too plucky. Could be nice. We put the pattern with the chops. So lots of different bass lines, different ideas, but the pattern can work. Some of these are better for that sustained bass and some of them are a bit too plucky. So let's do another root note bass, but for a different genre this time. So that sort of first look there, as I said, fits progressive house, melodic house, some melodic techno where you're doing these long sustaining bass notes that are following chords and following melodies and things in your track. Let's now try it with a sort of funky minimal house, micro house, sort of maybe something like PIV, if you know PIV records. Christusi, all into that area. Let's try something with a bit going into that sort of direction. So we've got some chords that are a bit kind of more faster flowing over here. And let's say that what are we going to do? We're going to bring those chords. We want an instrument to play those. So let's grab something for that first up. And it doesn't have to be anything too fancy. We could just have even something like the electric, perhaps, or Rhodes or something. And let's maybe just see if we've got something like a Whirly or a Rhodes. I know we do in here. Find a little preset for these chords. So we could use that. Yeah, I think the Intrepid Rhodes one could be good. Okay, so we've got our chords now playing back. Now let's do the same thing. We're looking for root notes, right? So we're going to copy these chords over onto the bass track, and we're going to move some MIDI around in a second here so we don't get too confused, or Heath doesn't get confused. Sure you guys are on the ball and that's not happening, guys and girls. So let's bring those down, get those out of the way. We're now in C minor, so we might as well kind of make our scale match these chords, which are C minor. And similarly, we're going to drop all the top notes, leaving us the roots and also the little filler notes in between the chords. And then let's bump that down an octave or two. So now we're down into 1 to 2. We might go one more lower, see what that sounds like. Maybe a bit too low. Let's try it up one. And now let's maybe dial in a new bass sound. So one of those more pluckier ones, perhaps. Okay, and now comes the fun stuff. So we've got a root note bass again, but this time we're going to try something else. We're going to try and really funkify that, which is why I've kind of said over here the funkifier. So what I'm going to do is grab this little rack. I'll walk you through what's going on in it, and we're going to drag that over and stick it on our bass rack. So it's going to sit in front of the bass patches that we've been flicking through. And let's turn it on and let's have a look what's going on. We've got an arpeggiator in this rack. Dollars House Music, very good afternoon to you. I think it's good morning. You're in the States. Nice to see you in the chat there. What we've got here is a random arpeggiator. So if we look sort of carefully, we can drag in the parts alongside here and rebuild it if we like. We can put an arp here. So first of all, the arp is set to random, not chord trigger, random. And if we have a little look along the bottom row here, we can see that rate is being modified. We'll see how that's happening in a moment. So rate, we don't need to do anything with. I have got swing here. So it would be good for sort of groovy kind of house music, as I said, micro house, minimal styles, get a little bit of swing happening in the arpeggio. I've also chucked the steps to 8. So it's going to be able to go up and down in pitch quite a lot. And over here, I've turned on the re-trigger of some notes as well, and I've added sort of about 11 repeats. So that's every now and then it's going to add a little note repeat as well. USA, indeed, Dollars House Music. My memory served me correct, I believe. So that's about the main thing that I've done to the ARP. And then what we've got alongside it is an LFO, and in this case, a MIDI LFO. So you'll find those in Max for Live. You could use an audio one as well. It just would sit on the other side of the instrument here, but it would still do the same thing. And essentially the LFO is mapped, as you can see down here, it's mapped to this rate, and it's moving the rate around of the arpeggio, and not too much else in here. There's a little bit of adjustment of the sine wave, but it's still a sine wave. And it's moving, as you can see, the rate of the ARP from 8ths, 12ths, 16ths, wiggling that around for us, which is great. And then I've got afterwards a random, another MIDI effect of Ableton over here. And that's literally just got some chants, which you can dial into taste, and the rest of it's pretty much straightforward. Now, I quite like at the end here to put a scale device. What that means is that if the random moves the pitches around outside of C minor that we're in up here, then the scale will catch that and keep things in the scale. It'll force it back into the scale. So all you'd be looking, the only missing piece here would be an LFO, as I said, and a MIDI one. Here's mine here, and you drag that in and then map it over here to the rate. And then as you can see, that's too fast. So what I've done is slowed it right down, and then I've brought the depth around so that it's flicking between the rates that I want to happen, and I've offset it slightly as well. Both those mean that it flicks around the rate of what I want. So that's the little device here. So now I'm going to, well, just group that lot there and I'll switch it off. But that's what we've got on the left here, right? So let's give this a bit of a play and see what happens with this rack on. So the root notes of our chords on this bass rack with that little funkifier rack. All right, let's try out. So I'm bringing down a few of the measurements here, such as I just adjusted the chants a little bit. That was a bit too much chants. What we could actually also do is turn on the scale awareness here, which is also a great feature of the new scale device, right? So it's banged it straight into C minor for us, so that's going to help. So it's kind of pretty fun, right? It's a way of putting a little rack onto these root note chords and getting almost like a sort of guitar type feel out of it in terms of what's going on there. And what we could do is start to, you know, record that MIDI that's going on there. So we could say, hopefully my computer doesn't crash, by the way. I didn't like this earlier. Still something with streaming software that seems a bit strange sometimes. Right, let's try this. So I'm going to hit stop there, but I could capture all that great MIDI. And then essentially what could be quite a nice thing to do with something like this would be to actually do that in the arrangement view, and capture the MIDI in here. And then we could open up the take lanes of that track. So we could get in here and say, show the take lanes. And then we could essentially comp together all the recording of that MIDI. But just for further ideas, but we could also go in here now and sort of, find our favorite loop and loop that up. And that could now be the MIDI we use for the bass line. So that's given us a funky bass line from the root notes of our chord over here. So we took the chord, we took the root notes, and we sort of had this little rack here, and that's kind of been spitting out some pretty interesting MIDI to do with that rack, which has given us some interesting, root note bass that became a rhythmical bass that's quite different to what we started with. So and then once you sort of pair that up with your favorite synth, fun little ends up with a fun little MIDI pattern that, as I said, has made a completely new bass line from a root note of a chord progression. So there's two little tricks for two completely different sort of styles of music, of how we could take root notes from the chords, original chords, and sort of turn them into, in this case, a funky kind of bass line that could suit house, tech house, micro house, minimal, lots of those genres. Match it up with your favorite bass synth. Pro tip: record it into the arrangement view, open up take lanes, do lots of recordings of it, and then you could comp together your own custom take of all this different MIDI. Perhaps we should do that another day, but that's a great way to get a root note bass from a little bit more interesting than, as I said, just copying the roots over. So 80-20, that I explained, and now a little funky rack that makes some pretty cool MIDI. All right, so let's get off the root notes now, and let's have a look at some other bass patterns and things like that. So what I've got here is the pattern here of Giorgio Moroder's bass pattern for the track Donna Summer, I Feel Love. Hands up if you're in the stream. Maybe if you're very young, you won't have been born when this track was around, but essentially it's a track that broke, the electronic music wide open as a sequence bass line, and it has this classic pattern that pedals on 16th notes in a sequence, and suddenly everyone was, oh great, now we can do sequencer bass lines. And big thanks to Giorgio Moroder for basically being one of the fathers or pioneers of that. So what we've got here is deliberately the bass notes of I Feel Love, but just very simply the 16th notes playing the different pitches. That's all I've got here. There's no other trickery going on. It's just the different pitches, and that's it. So let's have a listen to that. Right, so actually it's kind of funny because there's a happy accident for you. Hi Freaker, I hope you're doing well. That's a funny accident, happy accident. I left my little Funkifier rack on, right? Which I wasn't planning on. So it was already, with this Moroder bass, it was starting to morph it. So that's a happy accident. So if you're just joining the stream and you didn't see me build that rack, rewind, check it out. Cool little rack. That wasn't my plan here though. That wasn't what I was planning to show you what's going on. I'll just make sure I've still got that rack over here. No, I don't. So I'm going to copy my original rack back over onto the Funkifier track, and we're going to delete the copy that I just built. And I can turn the Rhodes off. Won't be using that for now. So we're closing up the root note group. Drag that over there. Okay, so now Moroder, the Donna Summer I Feel Love bass line is back to its raw bass, and that is it. And let's get rid of this rack. And now we've just got our bass patches. And again, if you're just joining the stream now, all of these bass patches that are in this rack, it's just simply a rack where there's lots of different bass patches in it. They're all Ableton Live patches. So you can grab all of these different basses just by going through the browser in Ableton Live, if you're in Live and Suite, and getting yourself into these different bass sounds. Because today I normally make my own sounds from scratch, but today it's just about sort of showing you more about patterns and techniques and things, rather than the sound itself is not so important here. So let's try out a couple of basses. There's one that's I think we want a punchy one. That's pretty good. So how can we improve this bass, right? So it's the Moroder pattern, the pitches are there, 16th notes, happy days. But it's very, very basic and boring at this point. So Freaka, Doorless House Music, anyone else in the chat, what would you suggest could be some way we could perhaps elevate this bass pattern, this Moroder pattern? I'm going to copy it down, and I'm going to give myself another example. And we're going to color that one white, and I'm going to just duplicate it, so I've got a bit more MIDI to play with than just one bar, I think it is at the moment. So let's get ourselves into a couple of bars of Giorgio Moroder. So these are the sort of basics. How do we get a good bass to become a great bass? Well, let's play around first of all with note lengths, perhaps. Huge difference. I like it really plucky. Now this will depend on whatever synth sound you're using, because effectively we're changing when the note plays and what happens when the note triggers the synth. So whichever synth patch we're using at the moment, it's this one. This amp envelope is playing together ball with those notes. So by changing the length, we've already got something more interesting. And what we could do is have some so step one, bit of note length. Didn't he have a delay? He might well have done, and if you were going to put a delay on this, you would want these notes to be short, actually, because that would allow us to delay in these spaces between the notes, right, each time they play. So he may well have done, and we can too, but then we definitely want to control our release, decay, note length, so that we're not tripping over all the notes, because this will just turn into mush if we did that, right? So if we have short notes, and we just use Ableton's delay send, you can get a little bit, but again, we need to do a bit of work if we're going to add a delay, and even that doesn't sound great to my ear. And if we go back to the original clip, it'll just sound like mush. And that's because there's no space for the notes. So I'm turning the delay off over here, and there's no difference to my ears, right? So it's a good thing you've mentioned there, Afrika, because that's something to think about. We can have delays on our bass, absolutely, and maybe Moroder did, but then playing around with the notes and the length of them and the release and stuff is really, really going to help us a lot, right? So the more space we give ourselves. So let's say we carry on with the short notes for a second. And if I go in and modify the amp envelope a little bit, now I can add or have a bit of delay. But I think it was, I'm not sure, as I said, we should look that up and check into it. But I feel like a lot of the lifting was already happening in the synth itself. So in the automation and modulation and things like that. I'm just undoing my envelope back to how it was on this particular preset, just so we're back to where we were there. Because let's see what we can do with what we've got, right, with the synth itself. So I think the note lengths short is a really good move. Having some long ones, as I said, adds a bit of spice to the pattern, just for a little bit of feeling. Same thing, we could duplicate it for 4 bars. And then let's have one of these up an octave. Nice. And a little fill here. So already we've got some more interest in here. But I think one key thing I noticed, I didn't get any answer in the chat or some thoughts, but thank you, Frika, for your comments. But for me, one of the absolute key things here is velocity. And, you know, this is going to sound very flat, very boring, very basic. If we don't get in here, and we don't start to get the pattern communicating with itself so that it feels like a real person plays it. When I think of Donna Summer, I Feel Love, I can feel the movement. I feel love. And it's got that sort of contour, that kind of flow to it. And a lot of that's going to be kind of what's going on in here between the notes, right? So if we kind of copy a bit of just handmade automation here, and then we'll copy that over. Of course, that's going to mess things up a little bit. I'll start again. I'll just copy my first pattern. The rest of it's easy enough to do again. Because I was going to do this earlier, but I was waiting in case someone kind of brought it up themselves. So there's our sequence. But now with velocity, I'm going to make this one a little bit different, but that's okay. So let's jump between Moroder nothing other than the pitches and Moroder with note length, velocity, and a little bit of a pitched note up. Now sometimes some students might say, well, that actually sounds better. It doesn't really, it doesn't have much feeling. It's just louder because everything's full velocity, but it doesn't have sort of feeling, swing, note lengths, all the little things we've now got in here. So if we want to get a little closer to the original, can play around with that. Yeah, I know which one I'm going to pick. So again, this just sounds like a lot of frequency. And we've got lots of adjustment for this, as I said, the note lengths, and we can make lots of little different sections. We can have short notes, so we could say, okay, the very first bar, we have it really, really plucky, and then it jumps to more sustained in the bar 3 and 4. And then maybe we go back to... So hopefully that just gives you a bit of inspiration there. Let's try out a couple of our other bass sounds in the rack and just see. I quite like this one because it reminds me of, you know, Acid TB303 up here. So you've got nice filter cutoff. It could be opened on this synth. All right, there we go. Also, let's go back to the original MIDI. So, you know, you could go somewhere between the two, right? But that one's very just static. So let's say we bring the velocity up a little bit. Sorry. Nice. So every time you're taking on a bass, particularly if you're programming and not playing it in, should be fairly much on your radar to work with velocity, to get some dynamics into the different notes, to work with note length, and to sort of coordinate that a bit with, as I said, we're not focusing so much on the synth sound today. But yes, there is some connection obviously to the synth sound that you pick to play those notes and the envelopes of that synth sound and the filter and things like that. But in this case, as I said, it's kind of, yeah, working a lot better just for those basic little touch-ups that have gone on there. All right, so let's move on to something else. So Giorgio Moroder, thank you for bringing the sequence bass line into the world, as I said, and yes, that opened a lot of doors for a lot of great music to follow. So I'm just going to check what I've got here, what I don't need anymore. So let's move all of those again over to our root note kind of part that we're not using anymore. We'll turn that off. Okay, let's come up a little bit. So another fun one. Lacking inspiration for a bass line perhaps one day, and you think, just really can't come up with one, like playing or drawing in some notes into a pattern, but I'd like to sort of come up with a bass line. Okay, well, here's a little trick that's been going on since the 90s as well in house and techno, and that is grabbing some sort of MIDI that isn't a bass, but it has some nice potential that we could maybe turn it into a bass. So what I've got over on my progressive track is a drum groove, right? I've got a drum rack and I've got this MIDI clip here of 4 bars of drums, kick, claps, hi-hats, all the good stuff. So if we listen to that for a second, we have this. So a nice kind of drum groove going on, right? I'm also, sorry, just gonna also put that over to there, because as I said, that's going to help a little bit. We can also get rid of our in track for the moment, don't need that anymore. So what I've done is, and we'll do it again, I'm just going to copy that MIDI track over onto the bass track, like so. I'm going to drag it over, and that's going to give me all of that MIDI there, just like that. So there's my drum rack, but now it's on the bass track, right? And what I could do straight away is make a couple of calls here. I'm going to take out what was one of the hi-hats up here. What else am I going to do? I'm going to look in here a little bit, and I'm going to sort of remove any overlaps of sorts. So we might take that track out for a moment, maybe even this one for now, the whole clip. Just mute some stuff, just using 0 on my keyboard, and maybe this one up here as well. And we'll start with this little pattern. And what you can kind of see is we've got a little bit of a sort of sequence going on down here. Might also take that one out. And now we've got this real little basic sequence down here going on, repeating, repeating, repeating across the track. So let's select all those notes. And now we want to bring them down a bit into bass territory. They're pitched up a bit high. So let's bring them down. And if we want them to fit our scale, we can do that in a moment, because they aren't in, if we were to turn on C major here, we can see that we've got some notes, or perhaps now we can see we've got a couple of notes outside of the scale. If we were doing this from the start, well, we can kind of ignore that, and perhaps this decides what key in the scale we're working in. But if we want to move them into the scale, we can do that in a moment. So let's just first of all play that back with the bass, with a bass sound. And let's just turn off a few things here. I think we'll have the house drums again. And now we've got what was prog drums, the MIDI clip, over here on this bass track. So let's play around. Let's take a few things out and put a few things in. The funny thing is that it's a bit raw, but we've already got a sequence, right, that we could maybe work with. And again, maybe we take out some of these kick notes, although if we make it a tech house bass, maybe we'll leave in some of the kick notes, maybe just one, and we'll build around that. So what I'm going to do is just loop up maybe 2 bars. We don't need 4 bars of it for the moment while we try and find a good pattern. And let me copy that into the second bar with a change or two. So let's say we're going to take that out, and we'll have something, yeah, a bit of variation there. Not so bad, right? And that's the thing. The great thing about this, using this drum clip, was that actually all the work had been done making a nice, beautiful, dynamic drum kit earlier. So all the velocities are adjusted. The note lengths are the same, but we can play around with that. The Bs were a longer note. But straight away, we've got sort of something here. This is a pretty good tech house bass. We've got something we could work with, right? Just by using a drum sequence, taking that MIDI, bringing it over onto a bass track and bringing it down some octaves and getting it in there to work around the kick drum. And now what we could do is obviously change the instruments. We can also, let's make a copy of this, put it down one, change the color again. Let's work on this one. And in this sense, maybe what I will do now is put it into a scale, right? So at the moment, I have no idea what the scale is of these particular notes. I can kind of see that if I was to turn on C major, like I did a moment ago, and we do that, we've got you know, a few notes out of the scale, this one in particular. And some of the others, they're not playing at the moment. The A sharp isn't in the scale, right? So what we could do is say, okay, I want this selection, but now I want to make it fit into a scale. Let's say we choose A minor and minor, right? And then what we can do is come over here and say fit to scale, and it bumps all the notes into my scale that I've now chosen up the top here. And now I could start working with A minor knowing that these notes are in. And we've also got some cool notes we can use here. So it would be pretty easy to sort of come up with 4-8 bars of little variations, actually bringing some of these other notes in. So what we might do with the white clip is crop it to that, and then we'll duplicate it. So we've now got 4 bars here. And as I said, we could do some little turnarounds and fills that just happen at the end of the phrase. We've already unmuted a few different notes here and there and add some more variation if we like to the pattern. We could keep it all the same, but we can also have a bit more variation here. Again, playing around with the note length. What I might do is just turn the grid off in the back. That makes life a bit easier. Multi-genre. We've now got a bit of a techno drum beat going on. Nice. So as I said, if you're low on inspiration one day, that technique has been going on since the 80s or 90s, repurposing drum patterns and MIDI and flipping those into a bass line. What we used to do back in that time with hardware instruments would be, for example, a lot of 808s and 909s have been used for programming in the drum sequence on the 808 or 909, and then sending that sequence over to your Juno 106 synthesizer and putting it down into the bass and coming up with something like I've just done there. So that technique's been going on an awful long time, and it's a fun one. Like I said, it can get you out of a, you know, writer's block, creative block, something like that, perhaps just getting a bit of inspiration going, and off you go. You've got a bass and you can work with that. And as I said, there's lots of possibilities with everything we've looked at to expand it, stretch it, turn it into, you know, lots of good stuff. By the way, if you are tuned in the live stream here, don't be shy. Feel free to say hello. Feel free to drop a comment and ask any questions if you wish. It's been good to have Doorless House Music and Freaker here. I know that both of you have been in the chat if you're still there. So yes, let's get back to great basses, or good basses turned into great basses. All right, so let's move that little sequence away. And now we're going to look at, and also the full, so that was an original copy of that, John Summit. I'm sure some of you know John Summit. There's a little trick he does to his bass lines, which is kind of a good trick to look at in the sense of one pattern. So if we start looking at bass patterns, there are many. One classic one is what's called the rolling bass, right? It's a particular pattern, the rolling bass line. Now, a simple rolling bass line could just be literally the notes in between the kicks. This is called either the upbeat or the offbeat. And we also have something which is called syncopation in music. And syncopation is when an offbeat between the pulse. So at the moment we're in 4/4. So if we have the metronome on, we are listening to the strong beats. And a rolling bass or offbeat bass is going to be in between those strong beats. So there's a kick here, there's a kick here, there's a kick here, and there's a kick here. Classic position for a hi-hat. Classic position also for just a very simple bass line that goes in lots of genres like progressive house and many genres, to be honest. So if we just play on just the offbeats, it's obviously very high up. So let's bring it down into a bass territory. Let's throw in our house drums. Turn off the metronome. So something like that, right? But let's say we make it a little bit more interesting. And again, we've not really been worrying again too much about scales or keys today. We've just been sort of exploring bass lines. But let's say we put this in A minor, that is. So A is going to be our root note up there. And let's see, maybe we can have a rolling bass that goes into another note, like something like maybe from the 1 to the 7. That would be the 7th note in the scale, as the root is the 8th. So I'm going down, and that would be the 7 below the root. So if we had something like this, so once again, if you've been watching the stream so far, you could slap me over the wrist if there's something I should have done already that I haven't done. And that is, as always, let's get a bit of velocity into it. We've got a bit of note length variation. We've got now a bit of pitch variation straight into the velocity. So what we can do, Ableton gives us lots of lovely tools now. We can come in here, highlight all the notes and ask Ableton to randomize them for us, which gives us a really random velocity pattern down here. If we don't like that, we can do that again, but we can also bring the number down. So I generally do this. So I might randomize it, but then I'll bring that number much, much lower. So it's not as big a wider range of velocity change. You can also do that by hand if you like. You can move all of the handles yourself and make your own patterns, right? But that will make a big difference, because speaking about accenting, well, we're accenting notes in between the kicks, especially if we just had that note only. That's a syncopated bass. It's kick, kick, bass, kick, bass, kick, bass, kick, bass, kick, bass. So if I slow it down, kick, bass, kick, bass, kick, bass, it's hard to say it, but it's that conversation. And a lot of what I started with today was speaking about the kick drum you choose, the bass line you write. There's a conversation going on there, and it's a very important one for pretty much all the music I write. There's a conversation happening there between those two parts, and I want them to fit together nicely. I want them to vibe off each other nicely and give us some good feeling. So let's bring that other note back in, but that's a syncopated bass because it's accenting a note in between. And if we move that note around, doesn't sound so good there, right? Could work there. Now it's almost where we were before. Bit of overlap though. And if I turn the grid completely off, so you can always play around with things like that, and you can actually kind of hear where it works with, and if we just bring that back to just a strip pattern. So I've got a bit too much going on here. Let's try and strip it down a bit. Doesn't sound good now because I moved it in a syncopated position that doesn't really work. So let's get our grid back on, bring it here. That works, but you can hear I could go a little bit in front of the grid. That pushes that groove even harder. So I'm kind of creating my own swing. So rolling basses or simple offbeat basses, they can be a lot more vibey just by making little subtle changes to note lengths, positions, velocity, just even with one note. But we've got a second note, so we've got another conversation here. So the teaser, the kicker, John Summit, what does he do that makes his basses kind of rolling? Well, he goes into the envelope page of the MIDI clips and he comes down the bottom here. And there's a few ways we can do this, but we're looking just for MIDI to be in the first box, and in the second box, pitch bend, exactly what we've now got. And we click in a couple of points. Let's maybe make the grid a bit smaller so we can click in a third, and we're going to bring that up like so. And it can be quite high up if we like. Let's just put it randomly there for now, and let's copy that pattern over. Okay, and let's listen to what that sounds like. And we can adjust this in real time if I didn't click the wrong button. I just want the top, so let me just undo that. So I hope you can feel, you can start to hear the bend in this note. So we're going to do it slightly different. I'm going to kick out that point and I'm going to go underneath the line here, and I'm going to use Alt. Try that again. I might need to, actually I think I'll need to have the point back for what I was thinking. I'll do it this way. So I'm going to sort of turn it into a bit more of a smoother kind of shape. No rude jokes in the chat, guys and girls, if you think that symbol looks like something else. All right, so let's copy that across a bit. So I think I should be able to select just these guys. No. So I'm going to bring one of them to where I want it and then copy it over. Okay, let's try that. Just wait for my computer as I push the wrong button, my bad. And we can change this a bit. Quite like it like that. Maybe that, copy that into this. So if we kind of do an A/B test on that, and we bring that down, and our A/B test, this one, the white clip, we'll turn that off. So we'll clear that envelope. See if we can feel and hear a difference to whether that is more rolling because it's bending in pitch as the notes are sort of bending up and coming back down. Again, quite different. Try bringing these notes down a little bit in pitch, all the notes. So I've still got my bends. So once again, very revealing, very much like the Marauder bass. This one, boring. This one, more vibey. Change our synth around a bit. That's a good one. Good synth for that. compare them. Quite different. More bouncy, more vibey. You can hear it, depending on the synth, comes out a lot stronger, right? White, flat, pink, or rusty colored. Vibing, has the rolling pitch. Doesn't really matter the genre. Particularly makes a difference on these sort of more muted basses. By that I mean these basses that are very, very kind of, you know, muted. They're fairly rolled off. So not too plucky, not too bright, more kind of muted sounding, like this. Right, so that's John Summit. How to get a rolling bass that's rolling, not just the notes, not just the velocity, which can make obviously all of that's very important, not just the pitches, bit of pitch bend. We can do it in here in the pitch bend section of the MIDI envelopes, and you can play around with the shapes. You can also use MPE to do this. But yeah, here's just a simple pitch bend, but again, light velocity, it's given that a lot more feeling than it had before. So let's bring John Summit clips over to our work that we've already done. So now let's look at some different patterns, just simple sort of bass patterns that we probably should have in our locker. Let's say, what is, well, we've sort of looked at rolling and offbeat, and you can do lots and lots of variations of those that just pedal on one note or a little bit of pitch change like we just had. What are dotted notes? So let's say we do one clip that's just straight eighth notes, which is a very simple bass line. So let's say we go to turning on in the background here eighth notes, and we do just simply with our pencil right across here eighths. Let's duplicate that a little bit. And again, so we've got a few more bars. Let's give it some velocity change straight away. And now let's drop that in. Let's bring it down in pitch. So if I didn't have that velocity there, it'd be a pretty boring bass line. Just making a little variation. as subtle as that. I do like that bass with the techno groove. So that's an 8th bass, very simple. All the 8th notes. I've shortened the note lengths and I've added a little bit of a tiny little note here. Again, little short notes, they can be really nice for just a tiny little blip or a little change, and that's it. Be just enough to catch our ear that something's going on. Straight 8th bass. Simple stuff with a little bit of extra stuff. So what is a dotted note? So a dotted note, let's do another bass line and let's think about our notes here. So if we've got a 16th note, so grid is turned on to 16ths by default. We've got a 16th note here. And let's say I would like a dotted 8th note. So again, let's put our grid, I'm going to leave it in 16ths because it's easier to do this. And if you're good with maths, this should be pretty fast flowing, that 2 16ths equal an 8th note. So there's an 8th note. And to turn it into a dotted 8th note, we just make it 3 16ths. And now it's a dotted 8th note. And similarly, if we're doing dotted notes for others, it's literally going to be that note length plus the smaller note length on top. So we've got a 16th here. We'll make the grid a bit smaller. We add a 32nd to a 16th because a 16th is 2 32nd notes. Now we've got a dotted 16th note, right? And that's kind of how you can draw in dotted notes. So dotted notes are great for house and techno. Probably one of the most popular notes because they have a certain rhythm and feeling to them. The dotted notes. So that's a dotted 16th. A dotted 8th would be, again, back to turning our grid back to the other way to 16th notes and then turning it into 3 16ths, and now we've got dotted 8ths. So if we sort of stretch that out, that would be a dotted 8th note bass line. And as you can see, we don't quite get a full 8th here. Let's say we had some chords in our track and we follow the chords with this groove. I think we're going to need to go up because we're quite low here. So let's go. So a simple sort of progressive house kind of style bass line there using 8th dotted, and we're just finishing off the last little bit there with just a 16th. Of course, you could, switch that up a little bit. In fact, these patterns could kind of change there, and then we could take that out and we could stretch this across for a little bit of variation. So we could do lots of stuff. What have we got? 4-bar pattern here. So maybe in the last section here, we go to a couple of notes like that, maybe even a few more than that. So for a little bit of a variation in that bar there. It's quite nice that it changes here, gives it a real switch up. By the way, if you are here in the stream with me, do feel free to say hello, don't be shy, and also let us know if you've got any questions here. We're trying to turn good basses into better, lots of trying to share tips and tricks and things here and explain some of the things that will turn your bass into a pro bass from just an average bass. Okay, so that was dotted eighths into a progressive pattern. Let's say that we play around a bit with eighths. So another one would be dotted and eighths. So if we just start, what have we got here? I probably should write in these so we kind of know. So this is just straight eighths. This is eighth dotted with a little trick or two. So let's do another one. And this time we could play with eighths dotted and straight. So I've kind of done some of them down here, but I want to kind of show you, how you can do it yourself. So you can play around with, which we almost had a moment ago anyway, the two, combining the two. So again, we know eighth notes, dotted eighths are 3/16. So there's a standard 3/16 dotted eighths. Maybe we have a couple of those, and then we go into straight eighths. That's going to give us a completely different rhythm. And then maybe we have a 16th on the end here. So we're actually using dotted eighths and then normal eighths and a 16th. Now that could be many combinations here, but you can work between dotted and straight notes to give yourself, again, a bit more vibe. Once again, we're going to give ourselves some random velocities. We're going to bring them down in pitch. So we go onto the A. And it doesn't take much to turn that pattern into a melodic techno bass, or it makes a great progressive house bass already. And like I said, if A is our root, we can sort of go down to the 7th if it's not too low. We could go to the 6th if that still sounds nice. And then we could follow our chords if we've got chords already in our track, or this could decide the chords we build on top. So we're going 1, 6, 1, 6, 7, and then back to the 1. Nice, right? And we can play around with the things I've already been sort of showing you, all to do with like little note lengths. And maybe we make a little flourish. Nice. Liking that bass, right? And that could be, there's a lot of tracks now, particularly in genres like tech house, where producers are essentially using a hybrid lead bass, which this could be. It could have pitch changes like this, a little bit of an arp, a little bit of a flourish kind of here, and we don't really have then a big melody on top of that. We might just put some nice chords with this, and the bass melody, they're kind of one unit together. That's not something new either. It's been going on a long time. We could also copy this bass down, and we could make it a bit different by taking away some of the notes where the kick happens. That would give us a bit more space. Could work, but it would need more other things going around. So if there were other elements, that might make a lot of sense, but it actually sounded quite good with them in. So I think we'll roll with them in. So that's a bit of both. Dotted eighths and straight notes, straight eighths. So dotted notes really can be your friend. They sound great. So it's a combination of the both. Dooted, that's an interesting word. Don't know if that's in the dictionary. Maybe someone can help with that. Groovy, what was groovy? Sort of similar to what we had already done, straight and dotted. What's chill? Well, chill's sort of using a couple of other note lengths that we haven't maybe used. So could we use quarter notes? Yes, we can. So let's say we can also have quarter dotted notes, by the way. So let's go in here and let's have a quarter note or two. So the same as the kick. And then maybe we'll go into some eighths. Or I think we could also go the other way. So we start eighths and we have dotted eighth. And then let's slow it down to a full quarter. And we might even have a couple of those. So maybe we have a full quarter here and here. Not quite that. Let's put those all together into one. I hope you're finding this interesting. I hope you're finding it inspiring to give you some ideas for some patterns in your tracks. And what is a dotted note, how to use it. Make sure you're always looking at velocity. Make sure you're always looking at velocity, note lengths and things like that. That's a lot of where you're going to get a boring bass turned into an interesting one. Let's change drums. So this one's a bit of a slower sort of pattern, so it might suit sort of something like a bit more like deep house perhaps. Different feel to it, right? Mixing it up with quarters, dotted eighths and eighths. Just going to play the original one that I wrote chill on. Bit different. Yeah, it's got very long. Nice. So there's some good patterns to get your teeth into, so to speak, and get your dotted notes from your straight notes and get those well and truly memorized. So what else have we got? Well, we sort of looked at rolling, offbeat, dotted, the John Summit, pitch bends, how to use root notes, taking them from chords and turning them into something else. Well, I think a classic bass is going to be also triplets are interesting as well. We might as well take a quick look at triplets when we're talking about note length. So if we come back over here and we divide our clip up a bit differently to how we're normally doing, which is by multiples of 2. If we go to Ableton, all you need to in Ableton Live is in a Mac, it's Command 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? They switch the grid resolution in the background fast. 1 is going smaller, so we're down to 64th notes, and 2 is making it bigger. Love those two commands. It'll be Control on Windows, and then numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 and 2 are your bread and butter, going between the different note divisions, like so. 3 turns on the triplet grid, which, as you can see, we've now got this lovely little T behind our note. Similarly to dotted would have a D if we could do that, but we don't have that as a default. But 3 we do. So that turns on the triplet grid. So we're now in 16th triplets. And if we go 4, Control 4 or Command, we switch the grid off, which is great when you want to move things around without getting trapped by snapping to the grid. So 4 turns that on and off, 3 turns the triplet grid on. So now what we can see when we put the triplet grid on, if we're down here, without the triplet grid, we can put 4/16 in the space of 1 beat. So this would be equal to 1 quarter note normally, right? So if we make our grid all the way to there, we put a note in, there's 1 quarter note, right? But we've divided it up into 4/16. So if we duplicate that quarter note over, and then we work in here with the triplet grid on, we'll see that we can now have 6/16, which is a bit of a difference, right? So what we can also do, like I was doing with the eighths and straights, is we can do exactly the same with triplets. So we can have a little bit of a mix between the two. So we could have some sort of bass that kind of works around some straights and some triplets. Perhaps something just as simple as what I've got here. Let's bring it down a bit. I'm going to move the playhead so it does it the other way around. Let's get some velocity into these. And I'm going to come out of triplet for a second, and I'm going to turn this one. Then we go back into triplet. So don't sleep on triplets, because they can also add a lot of funk and a lot of groove and a lot of interest. So it's quite easy in Ableton Live to access that triplet grid and to switch it on and off and have a good play around with that. And again, similarly to the dotteds and straights, of course, you could have all triplets, mute some, put some in, play around with the velocity, play around with the note lengths, play around with the bass preset that you're going to use to play them. But triplets are great. And then, as I said, we can combine triplets with dotted and straights, combinations of 16th quarter notes, 30 seconds, all sorts of fun stuff. And, you know, I think before I had a few very small notes. If you're looking for sort of something like a live bass player, you probably want some sort of, so let's extend this out. You can play around with really small notes. So I'm going to come out of the triplet grid, but I'm going to go down to a very small grid, 64ths or something like that. And just really nice little tiny little notes that again give us a little bit of vibe. What we could do is really pitch some of these up quite a bit for a really cool kind of, let's try it right up here. Yeah, it makes a difference, just this little tiny notes up here. And if you're making acid bass lines and things like that, little 30-second notes, 64th notes and stuff, bring the vibe, trust me. would be a good one to add John Summit's pitch bends to this particular bass line that I've got going on at the moment. We get a nice bit more rolling to it if we did that. Playing around here with the synth now. I like to make my own sounds from scratch, but today I'm using Ableton Live presets here, all available inside of Ableton's browser. But I can shape my sounds with all of these. So by adding a bit of glide, I get this kind of extra kind of weird bendiness. Nice. Lots of fun, and this is the thing, just a simple pattern up here. Those little small notes, they do what they do. Triplets and straights, velocity. Just showing you where a simple pattern and an Ableton preset could go, right? It could go where it's headed. So excuse me while I go down the rabbit hole. Try out our other patterns down here that we've made. So this was the triplet bass. That's that kind of chilled one. Not really for the drum pattern that's playing. try it. Just make sure I grab the one with the bends. It's not this one, I think. It's the other one. Oh, it is this one. Great. So I don't know if you've got any questions there. If you are with me in the stream, I'm going to wrap up in a second. Just been running through some of the basses I've made, the different patterns here using the straights, the eighths, also the John Summit bass line with the little pitch bends on the notes. We had Giorgio Moroder. We could even bring good old Giorgio's Donna Summer, I Feel Love bass back in the equation. That would fit nicely on this kind of acid sort of bass synth sound that we've got going here. Apologies to Giorgio if he's listening. Turning his beautiful sequence bass into a bit of a techno monster there with sort of an acid tinge to it. So yeah, in a nutshell, today it's trying to unpack some things that we need to think about when we're kicking off bass lines. First of all, picking the right sort of kicks that set the tone for also working with your bass. Remember, there's a conversation there. So if you're picking big subby kicks, you might want to have a very short kind of bass, or it might not be as low as the kick. It might be sitting up a bit higher. If you've got a punchier, shorter kick, then perhaps you've got room for a nice subby bass, a lower bass, and the kick is the more shorter, punchy part of the conversation. But think about music. You know, one of the most important things I've learned over the years with music is music, electronic music, house, techno, all these genres, they're conversations, and they're sort of the hi-hat with the shaker, that's a conversation going on. The kick with the tom with the bass, that's a low-end conversation. There's lots of little conversations that then become a bigger conversation. So it's the sum of all those conversations that make your track work really well. And the kick and the bass, that is a given. That is an important conversation in my tracks. So choosing the right kick is a good thing to understand. There could easily be a part 2 to this. This is a part 1 perhaps, and we can dive into tuning the kick to the bass and doing some further examples here. But that was some patterns to get you hopefully inspired, and yeah, some techniques here for, as I said, turning what would be a good bass into a great bass. Because when you listen to the ones where there's no velocity, no note length, no sort of imagination, it might sound okay for a second, and then you compare it with something else and it's just not there at all. So velocity, notes, pitch bends, dotted notes, interesting patterns, playing them in is great. I didn't play any basses in today, I programmed them, but that can help a lot of you that program. I love playing stuff in. Then I've got the choice of not quantizing or leaving things with some swing and little bits of errors, but kind of good sounding errors, and I'll tighten up what I need to tighten up, and I'll leave the rest to be free flowing. A little bit tricky to play sometimes in the stream because of latency. I've tried to bring that down, but yeah, that's another story for another day. Anyway, boys and girls, how to make good bass, better bass in Ableton Live. Thanks very much for watching. Thanks for those of you who did drop a comment during the stream. If you're watching on replay, I hope you enjoy the stream. I hope you find it beneficial and you take away some learning from it. Next Sunday, we'll do it all again, 3 p.m. Central Eastern Standard Time. I will drop a card to a video here that I would suggest, if you did enjoy this, to go and check that out straight away. And of course, small favor to ask, doesn't cost anything. If you do enjoy these streams on this channel, drop a comment below, share it to a buddy, Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. It all helps an awful lot, and I'd love to be able to help more of you. The more the merrier. All right, on that note, take care, keep on creating. Heath Home signing out. Over and out. Ciao for now. Bye bye. See you later.